This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is Derrick Mains. He is an award-winning content creator, a four-time author, and organizational consultant renowned for his pioneering work in process engineering, optimization, and transformation. I'm going to be a little weird here, Derrick, and put on some glasses here just to help myself out.
You got to read the fine print, Steve.
That's right. His work spans more than 20 years and 150 companies across nearly every industry, from early stage companies on through Fortune 10 companies. Mains' approach melds essentialism with a keen focus on human-centric system design, emphasizing the need for regular audits, reflection, and reinvestment to achieve optimization. He and his team operate at the nexus of behavior, utility, and culture. They focus on automating, outsourcing, and eliminating non-essential tasks to enhance both production and the human experience of work. This approach not only alleviates mundane tasks, but also redirects energy towards innovation and improved outcomes. At the heart of his work, his philosophy is the concept of reinvesting in the human elements of systems. He advocates for improving not just the work, but the overall lives of those involved, thus fostering a more engaged and productive environment. His ultimate goal is to redefine the meaning, utility, and purpose of work, transcending traditional capitalistic ideologies and enriching the human experience. Through innovative process engineering and design, Mains works in revolutionizing the workplace, ensuring systems are intelligently designed, highly functional, and beneficial to both individuals and organizations. So, Derrick, that's welcome to the program.
Well, I think we're out of time now.
I know.
I must have good marketing people.
Well,
they wrote a,
I toned that down. So, I mean, there's a lot more.
Wow. I'm impressed. And that's me.
Well, you're also the CEO of a couple different companies, the Process Fixer and Process Triage. So why don't you just give it a little context? Tell us, how you got interested in this very interesting work and kind of how you got to where you are now.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Steve. I'm really excited to be here with you and talk about the work that we do, because I think it is really important, particularly as I said in that bio, what's the next generation of capitalism? I'm a capitalist. I came from venture capital world of PE. I've been a CEO, COO, built my own organizations, consulted for lots of organizations, but I've really been thinking a lot more lately about the evolution of capitalism and how we currently live in a 21st century world, but our ideology about business was established in the 20th century. So we have 20th century businesses that have 21st century technology, and we're bringing things like AI in, and we're like, let's speed it up. And I'm like, wait. Let's make sure the wheels are tight on this thing before we go, blazing down the freeway at 100,000 miles an hour. So that is really the precipice of the work that we're trying to do, is really trying to rescue work from a lot of the mundane things that it has become, because in many senses it has become that. It's lost the joy of going to work, the excitement of work. I am an entrepreneur. I love going to work. I'm that CEO that lays awake on Sunday night and I can't fall asleep because I'm like, I'm going to be able to go to work in like 7 hours. I get really excited. But I understand that most people don't have that experience with work. Yeah. They don't like where they work. They don't feel valued. They truly are calling it in. Even if they're there physically, they are zombified. And give you great examples from my work over the years. I'll go into a company and I'll ask a manager, maybe the head of customer service, and I'll say, what do you do here? And they say, well, we service customers. And I say, well, give me an example like yesterday of something that you're really proud of. and they just are frozen. They can't recall anything that occurred yesterday. And
Yeah.
then I say something like, "Oh, you know what? I'm going to run out for lunch. Is there a good place to eat around here?" And they're like, "Oh my God, let me get you a list." And they're like, they know all the details of the menu. So something is wrong because people have a high level of energy and excitement about things that they love to do, but for the most part, they don't love to work. And
Yeah.
that's something I believe we can fix. And I actually think there are lessons from our history, particularly around World War II and some of the things that happened in the American economy in World War II that we may have forgotten, that I believe can be revisited, and that by bringing those things in, having a systems focus, understanding statistical control of our organizations and employee empowerment, we can create organizations that are way more efficient, where everybody thinks like an owner and that people enjoy the work that they do. And that's really what my passion is.
Yeah, that's amazing. And it's, so true. You think of what we do in our work. Do you know who Seth Godin is? He's
Of
kind of
course. Yeah, I love
so I
Seth.
went, I went and watched him speak once. I remember him saying, you got to have a mindset of thinking, like what is your narrative for what I do at work? So, I'm the CEO of this, pretty big company. And so people would often ask me, well, you're the CEO. What do you do? And I go like, let's see, I answer emails, I go to meetings. I'm like, oh my gosh, how boring is that? So he said, you got to get your own narrative going. So I went home and really worked at it.
Yeah,
And so now when people would ask me, what do you do as CEO? And I would say, I'm an ambassador for the company, I'm a storyteller, and I help people learn and grow.
I
And
love that.
then everything I do from that point on is like, okay, I'm doing one of those three things to help my company as opposed to saying something boring about the menial tasks that we do. And it just gives you a different outlook. So I think I agree with you. I think we need to help employees help define what they do and how they contribute to the success of the company, and not just list tasks that they can check off on a box.
And listen, I think Steve, you hit the nail on the head and you used my favorite word in the world there, and that's how. Because Simon Sinek, another great, writer and influencer, says that all companies know what they do. Some know how they do it, and fewer still know why.
Yeah.
Start with why. Well, we've
Yeah.
done that, and you've just done that with your own work as a CEO. You understand your why. But there's this real question on how. And I think I got to tell you, at this point in my career now, especially in this last year since we acquired one of our competitors and we acquired hundreds of their customers. And as we were talking about before this, I'm going into Vistage regularly. And I ask a CEO, now they can tell me about their vision. They can tell me their why. They're like, this is why I exist. And I'm like, great. What's your vision? And they explain their vision. And I say, okay, how are you going to get there? And they're like, I don't know. I mean, I guess it just keeps showing up and one day it magically happens. I'm like, well, if it's a vision, shouldn't it be visual? So show me the roadmap, the visual roadmap of how you're going to get there. And they're like, well, I have a written statement. I have financial projections. I'm like, yeah, but I'm not going to navigate a road trip across the country with a written statement or financial statements. I need a map. I need to understand the milestones along the way. I need to understand the actions that have to occur. I need to understand that at certain intervals we'll need to gas up and we may need to maintain the car if it's a long road trip. There's all sorts of things that go along with that. And so when I explain that to executives and I say, okay, you've got your why. So let me explain what I think your how is. And I think your how is actually non-productive because I think your how involves words like this: inspect, review, audit, monitor, check, control, verify, status update, supervise, authorize, validate. And the truth of the matter is, every one of those words says something. And what it says to me, when you use those words in your business, it means I do not trust my process and I do not trust my people. Because if you did, you would not have to spend 30, 40, 50% of your time. Before that ships to the customer, let me take a look at, I want to just get eyes on this thing before it goes out to can you guys catch me up on things? We don't need to do that if our system produces a consistent result on the back end that we can trust. So our lack of trust keeps us awake at night. And, so that piece to me, understanding the how of your business and looking at it and inspecting it and saying, you know what we do? Why do we triple check? I had a client this a few years back where they were so proud when they took me on their production line and they said, we not only double check our work, we triple check it. And I said, how often do you find something in the triple check? And they said, oh, we never find anything. And I said, well, then why do you triple check it? And,
Yeah.
and you could just see the CEO standing there
Yeah.
like, yeah, why do we triple check?
Yeah.
If statistically 20% of the things were coming through, because I can't get quality via inspection. Quality comes, it's built into the product. I
Yeah.
can inspect to just check, make sure we're obtaining the results that we want. But if I have to do excessive checking, then something ain't right. You know,
Yeah.
I've worked directly with some of the biggest companies in the world. I've sat down with CEOs of Fortune 2 and Fortune 3 companies. They don't check the work because they trust the process.
Yeah.
So they're doing something a little differently. So we have to think about that and evolve that as business owners and leaders.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a great point. We're trying to, be innovative and progressive, in our businesses, but we're using these old ideals. Like, a lot of people are kind of geared. They feel like they're not contributing unless they can check a bunch of boxes and check things off and do
Yeah.
things where really, I mean, the special sauce or the visionaries and the idea people and the, how, just not so task oriented, I guess is what I'm
Yeah.
saying, which is kind of the system of the last century, right?
It really is. And I think there is a moment in time, and I tell a little bit of history here because I'm very passionate about it, but there is actually a moment in time where America was incredible. We were really great. And that was from 1942 to 1947. And, most of us aren't old enough to remember what happened in December of 1941, but we've read about it.
Yeah.
The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor and launched us into the war. But here's the interesting thing that we don't think about. We think about that time, but we don't remember that just a year before that, we had the 39th largest military in the world. We still had 50,000 cavalry soldiers on horses, and our artillery, none of it was motorized. All of it was horse drawn. We're
Wow.
talking 18 months before the war broke out. We were a third world country when it came to warfare. But something happened in 1942. And that something really was the work of guys like W. Edwards Deming, who's really the father of quality control. He stepped in and the federal government asked him to create. Before that, he had created the census for the federal government, the GDP, unemployment rate. He had created all these statistics. He's, by many accounts, he's considered the greatest statistician of all times. And he came in and he wrote the war standards. And he took that out to the manufacturers and he said, here's how we have to do it. Because FDR at the time said, this war will be won 50% on the battlefield, 50% on the manufacturing floor. Because FDR understood, and we forget, German and Italian engineers, they're the best in the world. So we're getting ready. We're a third world country, 39th in the world in our military might, with a bunch of horses. And all of a sudden, overnight, we have to become this world power. So, FDR understood that. And he said, look, we're not just going to win this thing with big strapping young men out there. We got to figure out how to out-manufacture the two greatest engineering, establishments in the world. And he did it. In 4 years, they did it. And they didn't do it. You look at an organization like Ford during the war, all middle management went away during the war because they were shipped off as captains and lieutenants and colonels. And,
Yeah.
they got all the big strapping young boys that worked on the lines that could lift heavy things. They all got shipped off on boats. And Ford was left with women and children. People forget you could drop out of school at 12 years old and go work in a factory. They had a bunch of little kids and women, and they increased American production by 400%. They reduced unemployment to 1%, biggest GDP improvement in the history of the world, and wages doubled in 5 years. That wasn't a bunch of guys that sat around and did that. That was a bunch of
Yeah.
women and kids. And they did it because Deming influenced those CEOs and said, look, you have to go out to your line and talk to your people, because the women coming to work on the line, somebody says, grab a wrench, and they go, what's that? They didn't grow up in the 1940s. They didn't grow up working on machinery like their brothers did. So they had to rethink the entire system. And that system was rethought, and it really lacked that middle management piece. And it required guys like Ford, or I guess it would have been the son of Ford at that time, to physically go down to the line, stand shoulder to shoulder with people and say, how's it working? And they go, man, you don't know what the heck you're doing. Get out of here
Yeah.
and go fix this. That transformed our whole world. And yet, as soon as the war ended, we forgot all that stuff.
Yeah. You go
And the
back to
Japanese
doing,
copied it and
yeah.
whooped our butts through the 80s and 90s using the technique that we created. We developed this. We made America great with this incredible idea. And then we gave it up and gave it to who were our former enemies and said, hey, this is a great way to rebuild your entire company or country and to make the best products in the world. Go ahead and have it. We'll go back to our old method.
Oh, yeah. That's fascinating.
Maybe we need to revisit this.
Yeah. Fascinating.
So
Doing a little research for this talk, there are a couple things that piqued my curiosity. And you talked about calendar audits and then making a
yeah,
map of those, and then also in the same way, visualizing data.
yeah,
So I think that's really important because you take a guy like me, I'm really a right brain thinker. I'm not a detail oriented person. So, bore me to death with a spreadsheet or a bunch of numbers, but if you can visualize it for me or create a map or something like that, it's a game changer. So just talk a little bit about what you
yeah.
do in that area.
And we do that. Calendar audits are a really important thing. We actually do a RAG system, red, amber, green, where we will pull all of the information from a company. We just recently did one about 500 employees, looked at 186,000 meetings, and we categorize those. We looked at who was meeting with who. We found trends, things like, oh, wait, this department's been meeting with legal 20% more time than they usually do. Something happening, right? Now the CEO is looking at going, why is that department in with legal every other day? We found all these different trends, but we also found that they didn't schedule 15 and 30-minute meetings. They always scheduled them for 60. They always ran over. They always invited too many people to the meetings. They didn't have a real internal communication strategy. So instead, they had to replace it with meetings. And a lot of those meetings, going back to the words that I used before, had the word catch up in it, not Heinz or Hunts, but I need to catch up on this thing, or I want to
Yeah.
authorize this, or this is an approval meeting or a review meeting or an auditor meeting or an inspection meeting. And we had to point out to them that means we don't trust the system. And so we've been working trying to resolve that and setting some goals. And this is not, there's no real tactic that we're deploying there. All we're doing is making the folks who schedule meetings, EAs and executives and managers, we're sitting them down and we're saying, think through the step. Why do you need a 60-minute? A 60-minute meeting should be 1 out of 10 should be 60 minutes. 5 out of 10 should be 30 minutes. The other 4 should be 15 minutes. Start to think and plan your day around that. And we've already seen thousands of hours being recovered just in this educating them and just reminding them that we're not working. There is some work that can be done in meetings. We can create things, we can make decisions, we can design things. But if those meetings aren't those, if they're not educational or creative or decision making, then do we really need to have them? Or could I send a Loom video? Could I send a Slack message? And then we've had to go to employees and say, it's not about the FaceTime with your manager. It's about getting the work done. So don't put a meeting on just because you feel like you need to be seen so that we believe you're working. We trust you enough to understand that you're out there doing the work, and we're gonna judge on the results. So I think meetings are this thing that kills a lot of organizations, and we see it regularly. 30, 40, 50. Right now I have a company we're working with, 55% of managers' times is in meetings. How do you run a business when most of your time is in a meeting? So we try to visualize that so that we can see that information. And then on the flip side of that, I love telling stories. And one of my favorites is, thinking about humans as a species and going back to the cave days. Every time we had a run-in with a tiger for thousands of years, it was a bad day because the slowest runner among us did not go home with us. They went home with the tiger. And that wasn't a good thing until one day, somebody reached into the fire and took a piece of charcoal and stood up to the cave wall, and they drew a picture of a tiger on the wall. And all of a sudden, for the first time in human history, we could see that tiger and we weren't afraid. And we could say, oh, well, that's interesting. And we could begin to abstract. And we could say, the pointy parts of the tiger are what you really want to stay away from. The soft parts, we could get a sharp stick into those, and we could start to strategize. And we could, hey, let's dig a pit, and you go over here, and I have my spear, and let's draw the tiger into this trap. And we could do these kind of things. So it's funny when people call that art. I see this all the time. People are like, oh, look at these early versions of human art. And I look at it and I go, That's a board meeting. I mean,
Yeah.
that is a strategy session. And if you look at almost all of them, it's pictures of animals with hunters. And people are like, oh, they're just trying to demonstrate their culture. I'm like, no, they're not. They're planning on how to have a barbecue on Saturday. They're trying
Yeah.
to figure out how to defeat the enemies in the environment. So think about that. If truly what brought us out of the cave was this ability to abstract and to strategize and to plan, if that was the thing, this visualization and this separation of real objects from the abstraction of them, if that's the thing that made us human and that's the thing that made us dominate this entire planet, then my first question for every CEO is, let's go stand at the cave wall. I want to see your map. I want to see them.
Yeah.
Roll them out. I want to see where it starts, where it ends. I want to see the intersections in it. I want to talk about where we have challenges. I want to talk about the things we have to overcome. And Steve, let me tell you, 99 out of 100 of them, when I say that, they're like, I don't have that. Or if
Yeah.
they do have it, it's in Raiders of the Lost Ark episode where, we've got dust. It's like an archaeological dig, through the archives, try to find some old, decrepit
Yeah.
map that has an X at the end of it. So that is a tool that made us human. It is
Yeah.
the reason we have civilization. Cuneiform tablets, the earliest form of transmutable writing that we could carry around. If you look at all of the earliest tablets, they weren't scripture, they weren't stories. They were maps on where to find water and where to trade, and they were instructions mostly from merchants to their sons. And if you ever get a chance, look at some of them because they're pretty hysterical. They say things like, when you arrive in Babylon, you will meet some beautiful women at the gate, and they will invite you down to the docks at night. Don't go down there because they're going to club you over the head and rob you. So you read some of these things and it's like, if you think about it from father to son, you're going, oh, dad knows because dad tried
Yeah.
that game
You
once.
learn from experience, right?
You learn from experience.
Yeah.
So that's what built our civilizations. Mapping, SOPs, abstraction, strategy built our civilizations. And yet, when somebody tells me about their business, they pull out a written document and a financial statement. And I'm like, yeah, how do I learn anything about the business from those? Those are all sort of either theoretical or it's like an autopsy, right? Where I'm looking at it after the fact going, well, here's the financial statement. And it's like, oh, show me a map. Like I'm a visual guy.
Yeah.
I'm like you, right brain thinker. I got to see it. Get it up there. Let's talk about it. Let's strategize on it. And let's create a plan. And I just don't believe that
Yeah.
you can create a roadmap without an actual roadmap.
Yeah. And talk a little bit too about, the limbic system,
Yeah.
in the sense that, there are things that we feel and we're intuitive about and whatever, but we can't verbalize. So we
Yeah.
need to visualize them, right? We
That's right.
need to, yeah. So
The
to tell
limbic
us,
part of the brain, the lizard brain, has no connection, no neurological connection to language. This is why, if you're married or you had a mother, or you maybe as a man you've had it yourself, my wife has really good gut instincts. And I will ask her, I'll be like, well, why do you think that about them? And what? And she's like, Derrick, I don't know. I just got a feeling about that. Is literally the lizard part of the brain, the part that keeps us alive and surviving. That lizard part of the brain going, I'm seeing a pattern here that I can't explain to you in words, but you should trust your gut instinct on that. And it's funny that we, as this sort of evolved species of modern humans, still rely a lot on our gut, and that gut is the reason you can't verbalize this. And that to me was really helpful because many times I want to make a decision and I'm like, I just know, but I can't logically figure it out. I trust the know now because
yeah,
I understand there's hundreds of thousands of years of experience from human evolution that really is there for me to use. And I just have to trust it instinctually, which, sometimes that's hard to explain. It feels a little fluffy, but when you explain it from this idea that there's literally a part of your brain that's disconnected from your speaking.
yeah,
And if you can utilize that part of the brain, you can call upon hundreds of thousands of years of knowledge from every human that's ever lived. And you can put that to play in your business. That also means when I go to make a change inside of an organization, I need to be extremely conscious of the fact that employees have a hard time. Well, they can't distinguish between an angry bear coming down the hallway and an angry CEO coming down the hallway. From their limbic brain, it's the same thing.
yeah,
It's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Those are the only four options. And usually they're not going to fight. I've never gone in to talk to an employee and he just clocked me, right? I, I probably deserved it more times
Yeah.
than not. But sometimes it's this freeze instinct. We've all had it happen. When something's
Yeah.
happening, we freeze, right? Why do we do that? Well, that's because our body is saying, you know, it's better right now to just not be noticed and sort of figure this thing out. Fawning, you know, the wolf comes to take our meat and we go, well, here's a chunk of it. Like, I'm
Yeah.
not going to fight you. So here, go mess with it. I mean, that's why dogs are domesticated, is because we as human beings fawn. We will, somebody holds us up with a gun and I'm like, sure, dude, take my wallet. I don't care. You know, doesn't mean
Yeah.
anything I want my life over my wallet. So all of those instincts come into play, and we have to be very conscious in change management, in operating our organizations, to understand we can trigger a stampede. I was in a strategy meeting this morning with a company and we're making a change, and it's a really positive change. We spent 2 hours discussing, okay, how are people going to look at this from an instinctual perspective? What is their
Yeah.
instincts going to tell them? And let's make sure that we think that through, because in the end, we know it's the best thing for them. We don't want to just throw this out there and hope for the best. We need to make a map. We need to think it through.
Yeah, and there's, the different personality types in your company, the data, show me the data, or the analytical types aren't going to buy the limbic system feeling as much, so you've got to find a way to communicate that in some way that resonates with them, where somebody, it's more of a right brain thinker, might be willing to go with the gut, or might be willing to go with, let's give it a shot type of thing. So I do
Yeah,
think your message has to hit all the different personality types.
I'm glad you made that point, because one of the other things that was just discovered about 10 years ago about human beings is we have something called limbic resonance. And that means that if you and I are in a room and someone walks into that room and they're afraid, we instinctually begin to feel afraid, even if we don't see them. There's this sort of, I don't want to get an extrasensory perception. It's just a sense that we have. It's sort of like that gut instinct that fear, maybe it has a smell. And there's a Simon Sinek's podcast this week was really great. He was talking about how our emotions in our brain, the closest tie between emotions and our senses is our sense of smell. Think about that. The fact that we've moved to remote work and we've eliminated the strongest ability for human beings to make emotional connection is smell. And we took that out of the mix. Now, we don't want to think about people's smell, right? We
Yeah,
do
yeah,
not want to think about that, but we do.
yeah.
Every other animal out there works with smell for sexual reproduction, for finding food. And listen, there's plenty of times where my mother-in-law is cooking and I'm in the other room and I'm like, I'm coming in, baby. Like
Yeah.
I'm ready for this. That smell changes I begin to salivate. I begin to think about food. I can't think about anything else. So we've broken some of these emotional bonds. So this limbic resonance is interesting, because even if we're making change in an organization and we have people that are very analytical, if they're surrounded by people that are going, yeah, that sounds good, they will start to automatically be like, yeah, it's actually, I don't understand it, but it sounds good. Like everybody else is involved. We follow that pack mentality. And that's important for us to understand. And in the end, we have to remember, and I think as a CEO, understanding that we are animals, and not treating us like animals, but actually recognizing that there are things that we don't yet understand. We didn't
Yeah.
understand until recently limbic resonance. It's just been in the last couple of years that we've started to understand smell and emotion. What else is there? I mean, 100 years from now,
Yeah.
are they going to be looking back at us and going, remember when those idiots tried the Zoom thing? Oh my God, they almost destroyed the whole world, right? Because people have to be together. And I call this concept shoulder friction. If you think about, Steve, your earliest memories, the earliest things you learned, cooking with your grandmother, fishing with your grandfather, spending time in the yard with your dad, hunting, or going to a ball game. None of those instances, none of those occurrences are face to face. They are all standing beside each other, doing things with our hand, building together. And I feel like maybe we're losing that. And that's probably not a good thing. Probably a lot
Yeah.
worse than we think it is just yet.
Yeah, no, it's a really good point. And that you just kind of that intuitive, you take a charismatic leader, and you think, how does that guy do that? How does he get the people to follow him blindly like that and whatever? Well, it's not
I've
because
heard
it's
about, there's something in the US that's sort of like that happening right
yeah,
now. I don't know what the heck that's
exactly,
all about.
exactly.
But it's really true though, right?
So yeah,
Charisma goes along.
and so there's something that's whether it's smell or or intuition or whatever. There's something strong there that just the people that know how to use it can really use it, not only negative ways but also in very positive ways too.
I've
So
got to find, and it's funny because I made a note to look it up, and I'm so glad that you reminded me because I'm going to put it together again. But there was a story, and I'm sure I will butcher this, but it was about a French aristocrat who wanted to be an actor, and he tried acting and was so terrible at it that it was embarrassing. So his friends, knowing that his passion was to be an actor, and also knowing that he was their beneficiary,
yeah.
he was the guy that paid for the drinks every time they went out. They decided that at his next performance, they not only would cheer and really bring applause to the group, but they hired a bunch of other people to, throughout the crowd. They said, hey, here's a couple of bucks.
Yeah.
When things are over, it's not going to be great, but would you at least applaud? And within months, he became like this renowned actor all through the countryside. People were like, he's incredible. And like the critics in the newspapers are like, nah, like this guy's
Yeah,
not even
yeah.
any good at all. But the crowd was like, well, this guy's amazing. My brother-in-law, when he said it was so moving, oh, now I see it. And I think that's that art thing too. Sometimes we see this with art. It's like
Oh
somebody
yeah.
puts out, I've been to the Louvre and things like that. And
Yeah.
I'm an art. As you can see, I collect
Yeah.
art. I have 70 pieces of art throughout our home and probably 15 here at our office from all different artists. And I'm very fortunate that this gentleman, when I started collecting him, was selling them out of his trunk, and he's now represented by LL Cool J and doing Samuel L. Jackson's clothing lines and all sorts of cool things. Um, but there's that subjectiveness to it
Sure.
where, if you're standing in a room with a bunch of people with a very nice bottle of wine and everybody's sipping and, and you're like, oh, what a wonderful, what does it mean to you?
Yeah.
All of a sudden you get caught up in this moment. And the next thing you know, you're like, yeah, I really like that. And you're telling other
Yeah.
people and they're going, I don't know about it, but Steve, I trust Steve's wine, but maybe his art's okay too. So maybe maybe we need to use that to our advantage is the point,
Yeah. Yeah.
and
Absolutely. Yeah.
recognize that those are things that we do as humans. I think if we were able to step out of our own mind for a couple of days and watch the activities and behaviors of humans, and employees are part of that category, I would hope, we might be surprised at how silly some of this looks.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I also heard you say once that it's kind of that lost art of dialogue,
Oh,
in the value of changing people's minds. So speak a little bit to that. I mean,
you did good research here.
oh
You're getting into
yeah.
all my top. You're hitting like every hot button on me, Steve.
Well, I
Yeah,
believe in words. I think
yeah.
words matter and how you use them and how you say them. And so that caught my attention. So talk a little bit
Yeah.
about that.
Well, listen, I'm excited to talk about this too because dialogue is another not lost art. A lot of people do not realize that we stopped, in the era of Henry Ford. Education before that was a little bit more casual, right? It was people learning lessons. We were learning from elders. We were sitting around campfires. And this idea of dialogue goes back, I mean, it goes back to 3000, 4000 BC, where they would do this was a form of entertainment where two philosophers would get together and there'd be a massive audience there, like think of a football game, and they would do these structured dialogues where one person would say, make their point, and they'd have a time amount. There'd be a facilitator. Actually, dialogue is usually facilitated. There is a referee. It's like a boxing match, but with words,
Hmm.
and there's a referee there that says, okay, your time is up. Almost like a debate, and they would go back and forth on this, and the audience would be sitting there digesting this and thinking, yeah, that's right. And then many times the facilitator would say, okay, now you need to reverse positions. Now, Steve, you've argued this point, and Derrick, you've argued this point. Flip. I'd like to hear the opposites, and now you need to bring as much charisma and knowledge and experience to that. And this dialogue was so important because it leveled the playing field. I love the old saying that says, God made man, Samuel Colt made man equal, right? It's like, I don't care how little that guy is. If he's got a 45 down his pants, he can
Yeah.
take me out. But this rules of engagement around dialogue, this debate, this dueling of ideas, and then letting the audience really be the decider and walk out. And then people, when you read about it from like the Greeks and the Romans and other great thinking, civilizations like the Babylonians, people would then stand around outside for hours discussing these things and saying, that's a very interesting idea. Why do you believe that? Oh, had a different perspective. I thought he said this. We don't do any of that anymore. And if you look at our political system, not to go political,
Yeah.
but But listen, we haven't had a new idea in politics in 20 years.
Yeah.
We haven't had a new idea in entertainment. And I'm serious. Anybody that's listening to this, Google right now the top 10 movies in the US. Every one of them is a sequel or a prequel or a next in the series. Look at it for last year. Fast and the Furious 68, I think we're on. I remember the joke in the airplane movie in the 1980s about Rocky 38, and it was like this old, well, I think we're on now. We just changed it to Creed, right?
Yeah.
But I think
Yeah.
we're on about Rocky 16 now.
Yeah.
But why do we have no new ideas? It wasn't like that when I was younger. I remember, I was a musician in the 80s and 90s, and I remember being on stage in a hair band, and we were doing quite well. And then one weekend, there was no audience anymore. We were traveling around in a van, doing great, making great money. And we were like, what happened? And they're like, oh, Nirvana. And overnight, that quick, the entire industry changed and switched over to grunge music. And I was like, wow, this is really fascinating. When's the last time there's been a big change like that in entertainment, in ideas, in politics? So something's wrong.
Yeah.
They call that pastiche blending, where you just keep taking the same painting and doing new and new iterations of it. And listen, if you're into the AI game, AI is not coming up with any new ideas.
Yeah.
AI is only blending. It's only the remix. It just remixed faster than we could ever do before. And that, I believe, is a real serious issue. And I think we will look back at the early 2000s as the dark ages. I really do. I think we will look back on it and we will say, here's a period of 20, 30, 40 years where really nothing, lots of new technology came out,
Yeah.
but ideas stayed dormant.
Well,
We
and
need that enlightenment.
it's risky. You come out with an idea and then someone puts you in a box and now you're polarized and now you're labeled this or labeled that. It's
Yeah.
you don't get reinforced for some of those new wild ideas like perhaps in
And,
the
and
past.
if you didn't learn dialogue, because we stopped teaching it in schools in the 40s here in the US, if you didn't learn dialogue, which means my generation did not learn dialogue, then when you hear those ideas, you'll have a visceral response. You won't go through the motions of going, well, that's an interesting concept. I don't
Yeah.
truly believe that, but I'd like to talk to my brother-in-law about it because he's
Yeah.
got ideas. And then I explain the idea to him and he goes, oh, that's very, now hold on. Now, could we look at it this way? We don't do those things. I also think, Steve, I wrote about, I have a new book coming out next year called How. And it really is the follow-up to Simon Sinek's book. Simon, if you want to write I'm sure Simon listens to this.
Oh
If
yeah.
you want to write the preface, Simon, come on, give me a holler. I'll do it with you. But one of the things I talk about in that book is we used to stand around and talk about stuff. And I remember growing up in the 70s, we'd go to an amusement park, we'd go to a park, we'd do something. We didn't have cell phones. So if we were standing in line, people would start talking. Where are you from? I'm
Yeah.
from Dayton, Ohio. I got a brother-in-law lives in Dayton. No kidding. Who's that? I know. I went to work with it. I mean, all of a sudden, people made these connections. Today, I was at a concert recently, and I'm standing in line, and I never heard anybody say anything. Everybody's just like face down watching TikTok, and I'm like, wow, like we lost that. And
Yeah.
because in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we had those interactions. I think we were open to other ideas. We'd meet somebody from a different ethnic background and we're like, well, that's very interesting. We try something new. They'd tell us something about their culture. I have a wonderful developer that works for me that's from India and just an incredible guy. And I really wanted to learn more about him. So I went and started listening to some of the Bhagavad Gita, which is a religious text in Hindi. And and I found it fascinating. It was a totally different view on religion than I'd ever. It was completely different. Where I grew up very Judeo-Christian, and it was like, well, only God knows why. The Bhagavad Gita is like, there's nothing that's not known to human beings. Everything's easily explainable. Let me explain how this all works. And I'm sitting there for 2 hours listening to this on Audible going, okay, I
Oh
might
yeah.
not agree with the perspective, but they have an answer to every.
Yeah.
Why do people die? Why does war happen? Why are they bad? They're like, oh, so simple. It's so easy to explain it, and they just explain it. And you're like, wow, we're missing that. Something's off, I think, in the world right now because of that.
Yeah, I think you make a really good point with all that. Yeah, it's crazy. Another thing that I noticed is we've talked a little bit about this already, but you say American businesses often kind of reward that strong behavior, like, okay, check your ego at the door, just come in, do what you're supposed to do, and don't show any emotion.
Yeah.
And people don't operate like that. We all have emotion. We all have if we're going to get our best ideas and our best work, there's got to be some passion and emotion behind it. So how do you in your systems that you're talking about with these companies, how do you tell
Yeah.
them it's okay to have emotion and stuff?
I am so glad you bring this up because I would have not gone down this path. But one of the things that I'm really passionate about is process mapping. I think process mapping is the key to unlock. Really, it's that secret hack to unlock unlimited potential in your organization. And I've seen it happen time and time and time again, where companies get together and in an afternoon, they're like, there's $1 million in bottom line improvements there that we could do in like 3 weeks. It's like, yeah, there is. There's all these kind of things. But I got really passionate because I grew up poor. My dad, when I was a little kid, drove school bus. My mom worked part-time seasonally at J.C. Penney's. We didn't have a lot of money. And I saw that struggle, that sort of really blue collar Appalachia struggle that I grew up in. And I realized that there's this lack of voice, but my parents were very highly intelligent. And later in their lives, they became pastors and ran a big ministry and managed finances and did all these things, but they didn't have that opportunity to do that. But one of the things that I found, and I've had this many times working with all sorts of organizations, is that people are sitting there just sort of frozen in their position. And when you get out and you start asking them questions like, hey, tell me about something that's happening with your work, that stops you from doing really high quality, high value work. What's something around here that if you had a magic wand, you could fix? And very quickly, they start to almost become like football fans. They start to wake up and they start to get a little bit excited. And they're like, okay, wait a second. You know what? We had one here a few years ago where we worked with a company. They had these guys that went and set up these cell phone towers. And we asked them, we said, why does it take so long? And they said, oh, that's easy. They said, because the company only has budget for one tool set for 6 mechanics. So we have to share tools. So we mostly stand around all day and wait to use the tools. And we're like, what? And they were like, yeah,
Yeah.
management told us we got to be careful with, profit's really important. We got to tighten up our expenses. So, we just stand around all day and wait because we don't have the money for the tools. And when we got them tools, what do you think happened?
Yeah.
Do you think they were like beside them, they were trying to outwork each other. They
Excited.
got
Yeah.
passionate about the work.
Yeah.
Their wives are coming up to us at picnics, holiday parties, and going, man, my husband loves being like, he became a mechanic because he wanted to work with his hands. He
Right.
didn't want
Right.
to stand around and smoke 2 packs of cigarettes a day. He wanted to do this work. So I think we make people passionate by making sure they're in the right role, right? People can be misaligned in an organization, but also empowering them and saying, look, the Japanese run their factories very, very different. And I talked about World War II. One of the most stunning things for Westerners to see in a Japanese factory is that there are these pull cords all through the factory. And they teach you 2 things on your first day. The first thing is this, and this shocks a lot of CEOs. They tell you that employees cannot make mistakes. If a mistake has occurred, it is always a result of a system or process your manager has designed or implemented incorrectly. You cannot screw up here. It is impossible for you to make a mistake. So if something happens, don't worry about it. It can't be your fault. It has to be your manager's fault. That's a little shocking to most American business people.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
take the approach with that and I say, if I believe that, and every time something happens, I fix it so that it can't happen again, eventually I can hire idiots, right? I don't need, like, I want good people, but the system will become so good that they don't have that problem. And then the second thing the Japanese teach is this, these strings that are all over a factory. The second thing that they teach you after that, you cannot make a mistake. It has to be your boss's fault. Second thing they say is if you see anything that looks out of line, you see a metal shaving on the floor, you see a box coming off the line that's turned 1/8 of an inch, pull that string. Um, Now, I don't know if they tell them what happens when they pull the string, but that pulls the power for the entire factory.
Yeah.
Every employee, including janitors, have the right and ability to shut the whole factory down if they see anything that they believe is out of order. And it is the requirement that all management leave their meetings, their offices, wherever they are, and march down to that place and say, okay, I'm here to hear from my boss, the employee, what is going on? And the employee
Yeah.
then can say, look, I saw these metal shavings under the machine. And then they start doing critical thinking. Why would there be metal shavings? Where would they have come from? What could have what would the consequences be if we don't do this? And they
Yeah.
work through this problem together as a team. They bypass middle management altogether. They go straight to the floor as executives and they say, tell us what you've seen. And that to me is really powerful. You talk about people being emotional and tying in their emotions and their desires in work. For too long, we have hired people from the neck down. We even call it an all hands meeting, which is actually a derogatory term because think about what it says. It says, I'm the head, you're the hands. Come and hear from the Almighty. I am going to present to you what my vision is. But if we change that and we say to people, you know what, we're hiring the whole person. We want you to think at work. We want you to be looking, why did we get that pallet of material? We don't even sell that. What is this? Write it down, take it to your manager, show it to other employees. Say, why did we get, you know what, let me check in on that. I had an instance with a client just last year where I went out and talked to the forklift drivers. I said, what around here do you hate? They said, we're moving these pallets. We moved them 30 freaking times. I said, what are they? They said, they are a color of product that we don't sell. And I said, well, how'd they get here? And they said, well, the CEO had a special buy and they got a real good deal on it. So we move them around once a week all over the place. Can we just throw this stuff in the garbage because we're never going to use it? And then we did some investigation and we found out that our ordering process was messed up and that the CEO didn't realize we didn't sell that product. And all of a sudden, all of these things happen. And the next thing you know, it's millions of dollars of potential profit is recovered because an employee saw something and said, this ain't right. I don't like this. I got a bad feeling in my gut. Can somebody look into it? That's how you get people passionate about work.
Yeah,
You make them the CEO.
exactly. Very interesting. Now, before I forget, because I'm a music guy, I got to ask you this question.
Oh,
So,
yeah.
what was your instrument in your hair band?
I am a lead singer. I'm a
Oh, of
front
course.
man.
There you
I do
go.
play a little bass. The only reason I had to play bass is because I did have a tendency in my early 20s of stealing the girlfriends of our bass players. So eventually the band was like, you're just going to have to learn how
Yeah,
to play bass because we
we
can't keep a
can't keep
bass
getting them.
player. They're interviewing bass players because they're trying to make sure that they gel with the band. I'm looking at their girlfriend going, hey, there's an opportunity here. So,
Yeah,
so
that's
I've been a lead
hilarious.
singer. I was actually a worship pastor for a lot of years too here in Arizona. So I do a little guitar, a little of those things, but I've always been more of that blues belter singer type. And so maybe I'll turn that into something in my retirement. I don't know. I've got to.
There you go. So, but I'm fascinated with, how we all become who we are. So, what do
Yeah.
you think that experience and traveling with a band and singing your guts out and, living that life, what do you think you gained from that serves you well now?
I think it's recognizing that energy creates determination and motivation in people. And when you're a front man, um, and you stand up there and the opening act was terrible, or something's going on, people are upset, there's bad weather out, it's raining, you have to figure out how to bring them along. And you can do that in a lot of different ways, but being passionate is really important. And it's funny. I was in North Carolina last week and got invited out there by a CEO, and he said to me, he said, Derrick, I've had 10 different process consultants over the last 20 years. And he said, all of them had great ideas. And he said, I don't hear very much from you that's new. He's like, there's some other things, you have some good ideas and things. And he said, but you're the most passionate person I've ever met in process. And because of that, I know you will be a success in my organization. Because before, people were getting up there and they're like, here we go, we're going to track our time and our,
Right.
and our waste and mark it on this spreadsheet. And I get up there and I'm like, here's why we should do it. Here's how we could do it. Here's how it's going to make your life easier and better and how you're going to be empowered through this process. And I teach them how to use an XY axis to determine the flow rate on a system or how much time it's going to take them to produce a result. And all of a sudden they're like, this is cool. Okay, hold on, let me try this. And then they'll, every time I'm there, they'll grab me and they'll say, no, I've been working on this. What do you think of this design? And they get excited because they're using parts of their brain that they haven't used since they were children. And I make that point particularly about children because a lot of people aren't familiar that there was actually, NASA did a study. The guy's last name, I'm looking it up here real quick because okay. So a guy named George Land in 1968 was asked by NASA to do a survey to determine who has creative genius because that's what NASA needed in the 60s. We're landing people on the freaking moon, right? We need really smart, creative people that can think differently. So he did this survey and he found that only 2% of the population qualified as creative geniuses. He did this project, showed NASA how to recruit, and they began doing that. Now, George's next gig was with the Head Start program in the US.
Mm.
And George thought, I'm going to try this test on preschool kids. And what he found, I'm going to look at this, 98% of them qualified as creative genius at 4 to 5 years old. At 10 years old, it was 30%. At 15 years old, it was 12%. So something was happening in the
Yeah.
minds of kids at 4 and 5 years old where they were passionate and they were designing solutions and they were seeing the world and they were asking questions. If you've ever been around a toddler, how many times do they ask why on a daily
Yeah,
basis?
exactly. Exactly.
We need that inquisitiveness. Now, because the truth is, if toddlers ask why so much, if you have a new employee, they can ask why for their first month, month and a half, 2 months even.
Mm.
You get about 6 months in, and that guy's still asking, well, why do we do it this way? I'm
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
man, march that guy down to HR and
Yeah.
give him a severance check, right?
Well,
Let's get, so
we
we've lost
crush
that.
it.
Yeah, if
We
we want
crush
people to be passionate, we want them to use that creative
it.
genius, and we want them to get excited. If we want them to lay awake on Sunday night and be like, man, I can't wait to get up and go to work in the morning. We've got to spark that creative genius. And the only way we can do that is to teach them, because school hasn't taught it to them, how to analyze and design. Right now,
Right.
we don't. Engineers are the only ones in our world that learn how to analyze problems and design solutions. When I give my message to a bunch of engineers, they're all like, "Yeah, dummy, everybody's been talking about this for 30 years." I'm like, "Oh no. Wait, I go talk to a CEO group, all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is innovative. Getting my people to use their brain. It's like such a new idea." We've got to get over this. We have to recognize that creative genius is there. Innovation is there. New, fresh ideas are there. They have been stifled by busy work.
No
We have
question.
to move it out of
Yeah.
the way.
And you look at, that's why, I'm sure you've interviewed a lot of people like I have, and most entrepreneurs, most of them couldn't even finish school. I mean, they just, because school is trying to make them conform to everything else, and that's
Yeah.
just not how they're wired. So that two
I did not
percent
go
are
to college.
yeah,
I was a D student in high school.
yeah.
I did not go
Well,
to college. D student. My story, Steve's interesting because I didn't. I worked manual labor till I was my mid 20s. Then got a job selling cars at a used car dealership, and then got a job selling advertising. And then the best thing that ever happened to me, I met my wife, and my wife was like, "Hold on, she worked for a big law firm. She was the head of marketing, and she was like, this guy's an ad salesman, but I think he's got a little potential. I just need to refine, you know,
yeah,
women, if you're listening, if you can change a man,
yeah,
just make sure you get the right one. And so I credit so much of that. Steve, I don't even like talk about this that much, but a lot of people don't know. I didn't really know how to write till I was 32 years old. I had a job working for private equity where I had an assistant that did all of my written communication because they saw my written communication one time and they were like, you need to have less than 10,000 words in a sentence,
yeah,
right? You need to learn how to capitalize words. You need to learn, past tense. And I didn't know how to do any of those things because I went to grew up very poor, went to a religious school. My teachers in school didn't go to college. They
yeah,
just knew the Bible. So I had this very small worldview. And once that opened up for me, things really changed. And I think you're right. I mean, I could have never graduated college. There's just no way. Nobody would have let me in anyways with my
yeah.
grades. I,
Yes.
I think my SAT score, they just sent me a thing and said, don't come back. They're just like, you're not bright enough to figure this out. But that creativity sometimes comes in a different package. I have a great friend, Max Hansen, who has a company called Y Scouts, and he does recruiting for top executives. And I think his method is so interesting because he refuses for the first 2 weeks and probably 3 hours of conversations, he will not tell the executive what industry or what company it is. And some people get really upset. And they're like, I need to understand, I have to do background. He's like, no. I am being trusted by the board to find the right fit for the company. We don't care if you don't know anything about this industry. That does not matter. We need
Yeah.
to know that you're a leader and that you have the right skills and that you can do these things. And I got to tell you, 80% of the candidates that he talked to cannot function in that because they're rehearsed at interviewing. They know the right words to say in the right environments. But when you put them in this, what did Plato say? Plato said, I will learn more about someone in an hour of play than a lifetime of conversation. And I think that's really important. Sometimes we just need to get have a little bit of creative genius and a creative play. I'm certified by Lego in their serious play method. I literally do workshops where I play Legos with executives all day long. And I've had multiple executives come to me afterwards and said, that is the most life-changing experience I ever went through,
That's
because they
great.
didn't
That's
have to
good.
use
Yeah.
words.
Yeah.
The best part about that is I love it when I do Lego, because the type A's like me are, I don't know what to do. I'm just
Yeah.
like, it's a bunch of Lego. I don't,
Yeah.
the real creative geniuses, those engineers, they get up in front and they become the type A personalities, and they're like really animated, because it's what they're passionate about. And that's what we just have to do. We have to figure out how to reignite that passion. And the best way to do that is get busy work out of the way, get all this mundane meetings, get all this waste, all this garbage, all these things that people do that just don't make any sense. Get all that junk out of the way and let people just be people. And I think what we will find is we'll innovate way more. We'll land a man on the moon again, right? But we can't do that until we break those things down.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said. Yeah. I apologize for the cough every once in a while. I'm coming off a little cold, so
I
sorry
could
about
see
that.
that.
Anyways.
I kept things going a couple times because I was like,
Yeah.
well, if
Yeah.
he's gonna
Yeah.
make it.
Yeah.
I was getting ready to close the show for you. I was like, Steve will be back next week, we hope.
No, no, we're good. We're good. So anyway, you know what, in anticipation of our discussion today,
Yeah.
is there anything that I haven't asked or haven't covered that you for sure you
Wow.
want to get in the show?
I don't think so, Steve. This was such a thorough interview, and I really appreciate that, because you dug into the archives here. You found out a lot
Uh,
about me and
you
the way
know,
that I think about the world, because I am really passionate about this. I do believe, and I think the reason that, a lot of the things that I'm talking about here, if you're a listener of this show and you're an engineer or a designer, even a software engineer or designer, you're thinking of these concepts and you're going, yeah, that makes sense, right? This is the kind of stuff that we do. But like I said, a lot of people don't know these things. And the reality is many times we try to take these kind of ideas and we push them towards engineering. But that's not the case, because the truth of the matter is that every business is in the same business. We all are taking inputs and we're transforming those into outputs that we hope create great outcomes for our customers. Everybody's in that business. I've never met a CEO in all my years that wasn't in that business. We take inputs, we transform them into outputs that become outcomes. But the throughput, how the sausage is made, is the thing that we know so little about. We don't we get this macroscope of the world. We have this vision and mission, and we never take the microscope and look down at the things and go, oh, at the cellular level of my company, things are not as
yeah,
good. And then empowering those cells and saying, hey, Mr. Cell, what's going on around you down there? And they go, yeah, we've got an invader over on the right hand side here. And I go, okay, great. I can handle that. I can resource towards that. That's really what I think is the overall concept is. You likely don't know how the sausage is made in your organization. You'll be surprised when you start to look. You'll get angry when you start to look. And unfortunately, I have to remind everybody that employees can't make mistakes. If
yeah,
the system, I'll leave you with a last quick story here. I did some work for Walmart years ago. There's a story about Sam Walton. Sam Walton says, if you have a problem on aisle 4 today, you have an employee problem. If you have a problem on aisle 4 tomorrow, you have a management problem. If that problem is still there next week, go into the bathroom, put your hands on the counter, look into the mirror, and say out loud, I am the problem.
problem.
If
Yeah,
I'm in charge, it can't be their fault. It has to be me. So this constantly improving, this continuous improvement of my organization creates an environment where people just can't make mistakes. They just do their best work. If you've ever taken a kid bowling and they put those little bumpers, out there so that
yeah, yeah,
they can't throw a gutter ball. Make your business error proof. And then people can't make errors. It seems really simple, but for some
yeah,
reason, we're very passionate about, well, let's just throw away these people and hire new, better people. Yeah, that's expensive.
yeah. That's for
Maybe it's
sure.
better to just make them better people
Yeah,
by creating a better environment for them. And that's really, I think, my final,
yeah.
just what I'm so passionate about.
Well, at this time in the interview, Derek, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that
Okay.
question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
Hmm. Okay. I think it's this. Um, we've all heard from the book, The E Myth, work on your business, not in your business.
Yep.
Michael Gerber doesn't actually say that. He says, systematize your business, spend a ton of time inside of it, making sure that the system is really, really good and all the processes are great. And then you're going to earn the right at the end of that long, arduous journey to work on your business. Somehow we've tried to memify Michael Gerber's concept into a few words, but that's not really what Michael Gerber was saying. He was saying that you start out as that tactician, that technician, then you become a manager. But to truly become a leader, you have to make that system of the technician and management so good that you can hire people to do it for you, and you don't have to sit there and oversee it, and you don't have to inspect it, because you know that the system you built is going to consistently produce the result that your customer needs and create the outcomes your customer wants, the better outcomes for you and good outcomes for your people. So go work in your business, not on your business, for a little bit. I think my grandmother used to say, the devil's in the details, and somebody ought to, whoop that SOB's ass, right? And it's like, let's jump into inside of our business and really look at it at a molecular level and understand that we can make improvements that will benefit the entire organization. I think it was Ben Franklin that said, for the one of the horse, a battle was lost. For the one of the battle, the war was lost. For the one of the war, the kingdom was lost. All for the want of a horseshoe nail. It's
Yeah.
like, it's not the kingdom that we need to look at. Sometimes we got to look at the horse's shoes and go, we're about ready to ride into battle here. This is going to be a problem. Let's fix it where it's at. And that's really what I'd live with.
Well, thank you so much, Derek. It's been a real pleasure. I have to
Yes.
admit it was a little intimidating, interviewing you today because you have a real esteemed podcast of your own. So,
I do.
yeah, just tell us, what
Yeah.
that
So the
is.
Process Fixer podcast, I've been doing it for a few years. I've actually been doing podcast. I did my first podcast starting in 2008. It was a
Wow.
radio show, and we started taking call-in guests when we started streaming, and that
Yeah.
turned into my first podcast. So yeah, I still do that, and then you can also, this is my other real accomplishment in life. I did win an Emmy
Yeah.
for a TV show.
Yes.
Yeah, I did. I
Yeah.
won an Emmy for a TV show about my last company called Riding Fat, PHAT, and it's the story of fat scooters. Which, if you're on the West Coast, particularly California, Arizona, you know that business. It was probably the fastest growing company for about 4 years here in Arizona, and had all sorts of celebrity endorsements and all sorts of craziness. And we did a TV show about that, and won an Emmy for that in 2022. So that was pretty cool too.
That's congratulations. That's
Thank you.
awesome. Well, it's been a real pleasure, as I said earlier, and it's you're one of those guests that I think we could go on for hours and hours, but we both have to probably stop at this point. But I sure have enjoyed it. There's much more to learn about you for sure. So maybe we'll have you back someday. But
I'd love to come
yeah,
back.
so I really enjoyed talking with you. You really
Likewise.
gave us some great ideas and things to think about, and that's what it's all about: new ideas, having an open mind, and let's learn from others. So thanks so
Love
much
it.
for your time today.
Thanks so much, Steve. Appreciate you.
Okay, take care.
You too. Bye
Yeah,
bye.
bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.